Okay, students, this is Mr. Clegg again, and I promised in our last lesson we would start the unit dealing with the poem Count That They Lost by George Eliot. So let's get straight into the thick of things and onto the poem. So before we can talk about a poem or a piece of literature as we've done in the past, we need to understand what stands behind the piece of literature, what is going on with the writer, what is going on with society at the same time that this piece of literature takes place. So when we talk about Count That They Lost, we really need to talk about the Industrial Revolution, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but you need to know the Count That They Lost and the Industrial Revolution are connected together because Count That They Lost deals directly with some of the ramifications and issues of the way women and children were treated during the Industrial Revolution. So in today's lesson, we're going to talk about the goals of writers. Why do writers write about what they're doing, what they're writing about? What causes them to write? Then we're going to talk about the writer of this particular poem, which is George Eliot. And if we notice George Eliot, we notice the picture here, we notice the name, something doesn't exactly look right. George is a male name if you figured it out, and the picture is of a woman, right? So we need to understand why in the Industrial Revolution, a woman was writing under a George name, a male name, George. What was the Industrial Revolution? If we want to understand why she's writing about the Industrial Revolution, we have to understand what the Industrial Revolution was. And then, because she's writing about children and women in the Industrial Revolution, we need to understand what was the role, the tafkid of women and children in the Industrial Revolution. So, as I stated before, we're going to talk about the goals of writers. Why do writers write what they do, what they write about? So first of all, quite often writers feel a need to share their experiences. And there are several reasons that they may want to do this. One of them may to put forth an agenda, basically to put a certain seder yom, an agenda up front. And we'll talk about in today's lesson, what was George Eliot's agenda? And when they have an agenda which they want to put forward, quite often they know they cannot do things on their own. What they really need to do is inspire other people to do something. And in this case, is to call for social change, to call for a change in society itself. And we'll get to exactly what we're talking about here. It's not often easy for writers to do this, as can be seen by the picture, the painting of this writer here, who is stuck, who doesn't know how to do it, and they really work hard. Things don't come naturally all the time, and sometimes it takes a lot of work. A simple poem of 10 lines might take a year to write, depending on the inspiration of the writer, him or herself. So let's go a little bit deeper here, and let's talk about George Eliot herself. First of all, George Eliot lived in England between 1819 and 1880. And her real name was Mary Ann Evans. Why would she name her name to George Eliot? Well, as you can see by the picture here, Mary Ann Evans was not particularly good looking. And her father basically knew that there was a good chance that she would never marry because of this. And he basically had her educated to learn to read and write so that she could be an educator, that she could be a nanny and teach the women, the children of rich men to read and write and become educated. Now, basically, back in those days, women had no rights to property. So if you had a male, You gave him your money, you gave him your house, you gave him your horses, your carriage, your farm. If you're a woman, if you have a daughter, you need to marry them to somebody who's rich. And her father did not think that this was going to happen. This is basically talks about the status of women during the period in which she was living. And basically, she knew that if anybody was going to take her seriously, she could not use the name that she was born with because it was a female name. So she took on a man's name, a pen name, and her pen name was George Eliot, because she knew that as a woman, nobody would take her seriously. And she was a journalist, a poet, and an English novelist. She used to write books. And as I said, she was an educator, but even more than that, she was a social advocate. She was an activist in her way through her writing. And basically what she did, she tried to get people to change society so that society would be a better place. So now that we basically talked about who George Eliot was, let's talk about the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution happened during the era in which George Eliot lived, between 1760 and 1840. And basically, it's a transition. During this period, the way things were made or manufactured undergoes a major change. In the past, if you wanted to make goods, you had a lot of people, okay, in your workhouse, and they were making things. One person would make the entire thing. Well, in the Industrial Revolution, things went to a process, to a factory. Then we had an assembly line. One person would do A, would pass it to person B, would pass it to person C, and everybody would have a different role, a different tafkid in the manufacturing process, tafkid asiyah or yitzur, of what was being made. But if we want to have factories, okay, factories are expensive. So the machines will cost a certain price. The electricity will cost a certain price. The taxes will cost a certain price. So how can you save money? You get cheap labor. Labor is koach adam, it's koach adam zol. But if we're going to have cheap labor, it means not only do I have to pay very little money, I need to provide poor working conditions. Because if I give good working conditions, it's going to cost me whatever money I'm saving. In order to get cheap labor, they went after two populations that were very low in society, and that was children and, women. Two groups who had absolutely no rights. So women and children in the Industrial Revolution, okay? So basically, as we said before, they were needed to run the factories that were owned by the rich. The rich, they were basically white slaves, poor white slaves. And women and children during this period were seen as property and not human beings. And quite often, parents would sell their children, poor parents would sell their children to rich factory owners because they needed the money to live. Now, how did you keep these people from running away, these women and children? They would chain them, to the machines in the factories. They worked long hours. They had no rights. These women and these children were property and no more. And because of this, and they had, of course, no unions, so many of them died of hunger and overwork. And basically they had no protection. So basically, I just wanted to show you this picture, which basically shows what was for like children in the Industrial Revolution. The children working on these machines were so young that they had to climb the kapes on top of the machines in order to work. And as you can imagine, this was dangerous and many children died and were severely injured during this period while they were working on these machines. This picture here is not in Europe. It's taken in the United States, but the conditions are very similar. And imagine these children, article they shouldn't be able to run away. Quite often, they'd have a chain put on their foot and attached to the machine. So now that we have a basic idea of what writers do, why they do it, about who George Eliot was, some basic information about the Industrial Revolution, we're going to our next part, the next thing. And the next thing you're going to do, you're going to watch a YouTube clip about child labor at this address here. And this is in your Google Classroom. It's basically the next video here. And then you're going to go to the next exercise, okay, which is the form, and answer the question with your regular partner. At the beginning of the year, we set up a regular partner. So you're going to work with your regular partner. And you're going to do a share screen, and you're going to put your names in, and you're going to answer the question in the form. Okay? Then you're going to respond to the comment of another group as an individual. Now, the main focus of this assignment is I want you to pretend that you're a writer, okay? And what you could do or would do as a writer if you're a writer during the Industrial Revolution when women and children were abused, misused, manipulated, and taken care of and taken advantage of during the Industrial Revolution. I want to make something for sure. Part 2, where you go to the form and answer the question with your partner, you do with your partner. You need to write both your names at the beginning of your answer. 3 days from today, you're going to go in and you're going to comment. You're going to respond to the comment of another group as an individual. You will not do it with your partner. You will do it as an individual. So I am glad that we're back here, and we're going to go over in our next lesson. We'll look at your answers and some of your responses. We'll continue to discuss it. And then only after we really feel that we understand this period, we understand what writers do, we understand what writers can do, then we'll go on to actually learning the poem itself. So go to your Google Classroom. We have 2 things. One is listening to the 2 videos. That's your first assignment. And your second assignment will be the form where you do it in 2 parts. Like I said, 1 in pairs where you put your idea, you answer the question as a pair, and then you respond in 2 days' time to what other people wrote. So I wish you a good day. And if you have any questions, you can WhatsApp me, and I'm looking forward to your comments. And of course, I'm looking forward to all your intelligent questions. Have a good day.